סיוון, אנחנו די, לא שומעים אותי. רואה אותי? זה קטע, כמו שאת רואה אותי בווידאו. תביני. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. It's Thursday afternoon, and we have Ami Daniel with Dol Zatzman here in Tel Aviv, and Matt Stoney in London. Hello, Matt. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Ami.
Well, welcome everybody. I think we have people from 4 continents right now registered to watch this webinar, and today we're going to talk about the evolution of deceptive shipping practices and the illusion of knowledge, and unveil just a bit under the hood of what we've seen happen with location manipulation for the first time ever in the last few months. And we're going to also discuss what actually does this mean for the industry. So whether you're a banker that's right now listening to us, an executive at an energy company, at a trading company, or at a shipping company, we'll try to let you and provide you with actionable tools, actionable insights, and hopefully some tangible next steps to deal with this. But maybe let's start from the beginning. So let's talk a word about AIS. Obviously, everybody knows about automatic identification system, which is embedded in the industry. But maybe before we dive into that, let's do a brief introduction of our panelists. Matt, do you want to say a word or two about yourself?
Yeah, I will. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you may be. I'm Matt Stoney. I've worked in the shipping industry for the last 31 years. Started when I was very young. And I've been very lucky to hold leadership roles in technical, people, commercial operations spaces. and I set up Stonefort Marine Consultancy earlier this year, and compliance as well as the environment are on a lot of people's minds right now. And as everybody will know, the two are becoming even more closely linked. Thank you, Ami.
Thank you. Dror, a few words about yourself.
Sure, Ami. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may are. My name is Dror Salzman, and I am the Intelligence Research Manager here at Windward, responsible for looking for the next stages of marine typologies and trying to stay one step ahead of the game as much as we can.
Sounds good. And you have me, and my name is Ami Daniel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Windward. And actually, I'll start with a bit of history. Back in 2008, when I was in the Navy, we actually started plugging in AIS to all kinds of systems, like everybody else around the world. Fast forward 13 years, AIS, which is obviously automated notification system, it's a protocol, I would say, that runs on VHF somewhere between 156 and 165 megahertz, and is basically there as part of SOLAS, of safety of life at sea, and providing for safety of navigation. That's the origins of AIS. It was picked up by satellites from early US Coast Guard satellites launched by Orbcomm, a gentleman called Guy Thomas was very, very involved in that back in the day. And now basically AIS is integrated into almost everything shipping. So from shipping companies who obviously use this on something that's called ECDIS, which is onboard navigation at the bridge, which is automatically plugged in and fused with the radar, to tracking their ships worldwide, to understanding the cargo balance for ship positioning. There's been a bunch of stuff written that about a company called Cargometrics, working with Maersk tankers and others. Today, every shipping company is required, expected, and probably the leading one actually do that on a day-to-day basis. They screen their counterparties for ship-to-ship for compliance in terms of where they have been and what they've done. Insurance companies use this for loss prevention, compliance screening, but obviously for their main business of pricing and risk profiling. Energies and traders, actually, I believe these were the first ones to use AIS commercially back in 2010. Word in the street that some of them made a lot of money from getting the what's called, quote unquote, the alpha, the profit, the preferred understanding of where ships are. But today it's absolutely a standard insofar as compliance screening is concerned, vetting is concerned, which is basically safety, and ESG, which is carbon emissions. And last but not least, financial institutions, in other words, banks, use this for compliance screening, trade finance and ship finance. I believe that by the end of 2022, every proper trade finance bank will be screening automatically every vessel in the world for their AIS movements, as well as for trade operations. Once you issue an LC, well, you want to make sure it's properly done, that the cargo is properly picked up, properly dropped, and so forth. Or in other words, it's deeply embedded. So how did it all begin? So from SOLAS, the International Convention of Safety of Life at Sea, 1980s, to civilian GPS. Remember back in the day when GPS was a thing, it wasn't everyone's iPhone or whatever, Android. In early 2000, AIS became from everyone. You have a bunch of companies. AIS Live was one of them, and was acquired by IHS. And you had marine traffic built in 2010. You had vessel tracker, and then it became actually kind of everyone's business. 2010, as I said, satellites plus AI. And now it gets interesting because these were the days of the first sanctions rounds on Iran and Syria. And actually, we started seeing identity changes. So remember, Windward has been doing this for 10 years. So we actually seen a few cycles of these cat and mouse games. One side does something, the other one does something more sophisticated, and vice versa. So 2014, we saw identity changes. Then 2016, we saw what's called dark activity. So intentional turning off transmissions. Every third vessel coming into the Arab Gulf or Persian Gulf gets, quote unquote, lost. Or in other words, the signal is getting lost. But then, and you need to differentiate between that and something intentional. It's actually quite hard because you want to reduce as much as possible the false positives. But then we saw identity spoofing in 2018. So vessels commencing transmitting invalid IMOs, assuming identities of innocent vessels, And you had some very high profile cases also apprehended by the DOJ. I believe the Achilles was one of them. In 2020, we actually had flag hopping. So vessels use multiple flags over a short period of time. So obviously all this typology is constantly changing, constantly moving forward. But then we had actually more trade sanctions. We've had growing deceptive shipping practices, and we've had regulation. So basically, obviously many of you know that, but May 2020 and then June 2020, you had the US and the UK, OFAC and OFSI, respectively, adopt what's called deceptive shipping practices coined by the UN panel of experts. And that is probably the cause to what we're seeing today. So we've had the bad actors do something, if you will, then regulation require in one instance, boom, from all the commercial entities, whether you're an energy company, insurance company, a trader, a bank, and so forth, you're now required to look for quote unquote deceptive shipping practices. I'm not going to delve into the definition right now, but basically it's a set of 8 or so behaviors. You need to go back in history and check them. And without AI, it takes a lot of time, and B, you have so many false positives. You just kind of either ignore them or stop your business. And with that, I want to kind of turn over to Dror to take us through, Dror, in the last 6 or 7 years, what have you seen and what have we seen in the vulnerability of the global navigation system, and how does that connect to what we're seeing today? Dror, over to you.
Thanks, Ami. So as Ami mentioned, the fact that AIS became so popular in the shipping market led to a lot of research as soon as it became civilian in the commercial use, led to a lot of research about also the vulnerabilities, and not only of AIS, but global navigation systems in general, right? What happens if a bad actor would like to get a vessel off track? What happens if a bad actor would want to show that a vessel is somewhere that it isn't, or maybe jam the GPS on board the vessel to make it unsafe to travel, or maybe even impossible to enter a port? Now, we were used to seeing this on a military scale, right? So when there was maybe a visit by Putin to the island of Crimea, you would see suddenly GPS jamming happening, or offshore the port of Tartus in Syria. These are things that we've seen in the past. But the 3 instances of research that you see here in front of you are people taking it to the next level within the commercial use of global navigation systems, and AIS particularly. So in 2014, a company called Black Hat was able to actually hack the servers of a tracking system, enabling them to create, as you can see here on the left side, to create a synthetic path for this vessel. Pretty obvious, as this vessel was actually spelling a word out in the middle of the ocean. Then in 2019, C4ADS, a really big research institution, NGO, published a report called Above Us Only Stars, which actually looked into where the vulnerabilities physically are between the AIS device and the GPS, between the AIS device and the satellite that is capturing it, the terrestrial stations, and just really mentioned where this manipulation can take place. And this was kind of like the warning sign of what we're about to see next. The last thing that I wanted to mention here was, and I want you to remember these crop circles you see on the right, these are actually synthetic vessel paths that were identified by research conducted by Global Fishing Watch with additional partners. And these very strange, I would say, sailing patterns were conducted by vessels offshore the coast of Western United States. Now, all this was kind of like a build-up preparation towards what we are seeing. And again, I want to reference to what Ami mentioned before, and that is the development of the deceptive shipping practices. I think that the regulation did a very good job in May 2020 and in June 2020 to kind of highlight what are the main typologies that are taking place. And Ami mentioned flag hopping. That is something that was actually mentioned in the advisory itself, although it was fairly new and it was being used at the time. Also, dark activity and other behavioral typologies were mentioned. What we're about to see now and what we have uncovered recently is the first time that we see this type of military-grade technology being used not only at scale in the commercial market, but also under the orchestration of bad actors that are using this technology to actually bust sanctions and get that crude sanctioned commodities out of Venezuela, Iran, and so forth. I want to take you to our first case here that maybe exemplifies what we are about to see at a larger scale. The vessel named the Berlina, which is a 274-meter tanker, was spotted inside a Venezuelan port in the first week of March. Now, at this point, we knew that the vessel had been spotted physically. We had confirmation by both Vortexa and target trackers that allowed us to understand that this vessel was actually within Jose Terminal inside Venezuela. Now, in every tracking system that you would open this vessel on that first week of March, you would see the vessel just commonly drifting offshore the islands of Guadeloupe and Grenada and the Caribbean and other Caribbean islands, as you can see here in the image on the right. Now, the question is, how can a vessel be one place and transmit that it's being in another, right? And this is exactly what we want to reference in the term of the technology being used. Now, as we saw before, this technology was already in existence, right? This was researched in the past. This is the first time that we see this being used not only at scale, but also at a very specific target, which is the export of sanctioned commodities. Now, what we did as soon as we discovered the case of the Berlina was to actually identify behavioral typologies of these vessels that also didn't look very natural. For example, this vessel made a 180-degree turn in under 2 minutes, which for a vessel in the size of almost 2 soccer fields, that is a bit problematic when talking about behavior of shipping in general and also just feasibility of this happening. When we took this behavior at scale, we found that there is a behavioral connection between this vessel and additional vessels composing an entire fleet. And this entire fleet was actually conducting the exact same behavior over a period of a few months, starting around, I would say, October 2020, and until today. This is ongoing as we speak. And these vessels that were conducting this typology, and as you can see in the bottom right, the image shows that they were conducting the exact same behavior. When we talked about this with people of the maritime domain experts, they said that also the location they chose to do this was outside major shipping routes, which also makes sense given that you wouldn't want anyone seeing this. Now, we got third-party confirmation for most of these vessels that were actually inside Venezuela while they were transmitting what you can see right here, which is just a drifting pattern for a vessel of this size offshore these Caribbean island nations. Now, this raises the question as to how was this done? How was this coordinated? What did it involve the people on board the vessel that were actually managing the vessel, and if there is a commercial entity behind this vessel which is responsible for the orchestration. And I want to take you to the next connection between these vessels beyond the behavior, which allowed us to identify it, and that is the ownership connection. Because this operation wasn't just orchestrated at the moment it happened. There was a very big buildup towards this. Not only was it the buying, the purchasing of these vessels in the past, I would say a time span of a year by very specific companies, which are all interconnected, but also there was a change of registry. So this also involves a change of registration with the flag registry, in this case, the flag of Cyprus. And all of these vessels were actually connected at one of the 7 levels of ownership. If you would just look at the beneficial owner or the registered owner, that wouldn't be enough. We saw a lot of connections through the ISM operator, through the commercial manager, and the fact that 7 levels of ownership are now available allowed us to also make this connection for the entire fleet and not only a few of the vessels, and allowed us to discover many more cases than we would to begin with. All these companies, as I said before, are interconnected in some way, whether it be through the address or phone or even single people that are connecting them. And they're all based out of either Cyprus or Greece. And all the vessels had an ownership change for one of the 7 levels of ownership in the past year. Again, this is showing how this was being prepared. There was a huge buildup towards this operation, and this operation, as soon as it began, you could see not only on the ownership side, but also on the behavioral side that this was completely orchestrated. The next thing that was really interesting to see was also the terms of the flag. As Ami mentioned before, identity changes are something that we are used to seeing for many years now as a deceptive shipping practice. The use of flags of convenience, the use of flag of low performance. But in this case, it's none of those. It's not a flag of convenience. It's not a flag of low performance. It's just the usage of a flag that would seem as would raise at least suspicion as possible, right? Because what you want to do is you want to look legitimate. And I think that also in 2021 we're seeing a big shift. There's a big return to transmission, I would call it, right? We see the North Korean fleet suddenly also resuming transmission after being dark for a very long period of time. And I think that what happens is that bad actors are assuming and understanding that trying to look legitimate has become easier using new technologies, and that actually looking not legitimate by using flags of convenience or flag of low performance, not transmitted at all, actually raises more red flags than trying to disguise yourself under a legitimate type of operation and flag and even transmission profile. And I think that this is kind of the new next step in terms of the manipulation. And this is really the I would say the best example, right? An entire fleet being prepared, transmitting normally while they're doing something else completely. We were able, through this fleet and all the cases mentioned here, we were able to identify multiple indicators that allow us to discover this typology and understand that this is not just happening offshore Venezuela. This is way larger than that. And by using those indicators and by implementing artificial intelligence algorithms to them to look for those elements which are not so easy to find, we were able to identify additional cases taking place also in the Persian Gulf, in West Africa, Trinidad and Tobago. And as we were preparing for this webinar, the cases just keep on coming. And we found also cases in the Malacca Straits. And this is definitely a global issue. Now, at this point, we are seeing this near sanctioned regimes. This could also trickle down the technology itself, not so complicated to attain. This could definitely trickle down to also arms smuggling, drug smuggling, human trafficking, and other illicit typologies that might benefit from the usage of this technology. And we are working not only on identifying how these vessels are doing this, but also what other possibilities are there to do this in the future. As Ami mentioned, we are in this cat and mouse game for a long time now. And we understand that you can't just be reactive to what is happening, but also be proactive and try to understand how these bad actors are thinking, what are the limits of the technology in which they can operate, and try to be one step ahead in understanding that technology better than they are. Soon enough, we will have this. This is already actually implemented into our product as a new building block for the windward risk. We are identifying more and more cases, as I mentioned before, and these are already in the dozens. And I think that nowadays it's about the illusion of knowledge, right? What you see is not necessarily what you get, especially when talking about a VHF-based technology such as AIS. And now what we're trying to handle is, and what we are tackling right now is how to provide the best, I would say, insight at the end of the day of whether this vessel is legitimate or not, when finding out the right answer has become way more complicated than it has before. And I think that the addition of this new risk building block to the already existing building blocks that have to do with the behavioral profile, I think is taking this one step forward and is enabling us to actually support decisions at a much deeper level. And as I said before, this is already implemented into our product and available to our customers today, and hopefully will support their decisions starting today and into the future. And now we'll hand it over back to Ami and Matt to refer on how this implicates to the market, as they know about this much more than I do.
Thanks, Dror. So just before we do that, a quick customer story. So as it happened, I was on the line with some of our team and one of our customers, and kind of live, they were asking us, can you please maybe search, I'll give you a name and can you search that? And we saw that and we searched the vessel and something looked strange, but then the guy on the other end, which is basically a head of risk for credit operation or head of credit for bunkering operations, said, I feel something strange about this case. Do you mind taking another look? And Dror, I think that's where we called you, and you, I think within a couple of hours, you verified that although that vessel had looked like it was having a dark activity, I think it was off Oman, you actually found that it was tampering its location. and actually loading in one of the docks in Iran. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or in other words, I think professionals at this point have a very good hunch on something when something's wrong or doesn't make sense. But the thing is scale, right? When you have 10 transactions a day, 100, 1,000, right? If you're a bank, you could have, hey, you could have 500,000 a day. How do you do that at scale? I think probably the answer is artificial intelligence. And maybe with that, I want to come back. Lord, do you mind giving me control again, please, on the screen? Thank you. Back to this slide, which says, now that we understand that the mere track of a vessel, and though you took it to arms smuggling, but let me give you a much more basic scenario. Okay, is that okay? You have basically commodity traders doing business intelligence with these vessels, right? And with AIS. What happens if people start manipulating their location because it influences the price they're getting, influences the supply and demand? Maybe, or if not, to have other people look at what they're doing, because that's a big ARB deal they want to do. So just keep that hanging, that question. Maybe turn over to Matt. Matt, could you talk to us about how you know that AIS is used within the industry? And maybe that's a good time to tell the crowd here, feel free to ask questions. You have a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. So you can just type in your question, we'll see them, and basically you'll have me ask Matt and Dror, or try to answer them myself if I know, but the answer. So feel free doing it as of now. Matt, how is AIS embedded in the industry, and what's the implication of what we just saw?
So thanks for that, Ami, and also Dror for the explanation that this really is an arms race, and trying to keep one step ahead is not a straightforward task. The slide that's up on the screen now, I sort of see three main areas, but they show the interdependencies between all of the stakeholders. After all, everybody's on the hook in this space for getting it wrong. So there's a common interest in getting it right. Firstly, there's the core compliance functionality. Secondly, there's the ability to enhance and augment vetting and assessment of third parties. And that's not just limited to assets and ships. That's the people behind those assets and ships, which I think Dror, with his story of the Berliner, shared a bit on that. And thirdly, what we're seeing more is the ability to gain commercial insights on items such as trade flows, molecule tracking, and actually in the ability to improve voyage economics, which gets people excited because it's not all doom and gloom and being concerned that you're going to be entering into contracts with people and then getting bills that you're not expecting. So I think for me, the difference here for leveraging technology compared to traditional methods is we're moving from a static assessment to a dynamic assessment, or in other words, moving from snapshots to real-time monitoring of operations. And importantly, it's around the behaviors. So behaviors matter for compliance. It's now mandated that they must be factored in as part of the overall due diligence checks and monitoring. But they're also a fundamental component when it comes to making money, as well as managing risk. Simply put, this tool, by taking everything that AIS can tell us into one place, enables it. When people talk about compliance, there's bundles of conversations come out of that. But I break it down into, well, what is the risk? That's what I used to get from the front office. What's the risk? And simply put, that would be, you're going to enter into a contract with a third party who is subsequently, whilst they're on business with you, is identified, or pardon the phrase here, but they're pinged for breaking sanctions. Now, that's just the risk. The event that you need to avoid would be the undesirable downsides of that. I spoke to my phone before and looked at what the Brent price was. If you loaded a VLCC now, so that's 2 million barrels of crude oil, you would have somewhere in the region of $140 million worth of cargo on board that ship. That's a lot of working capital. And should anything happen to that vessel whilst it's on business with you, it's a big hole to fill. And that's even before you get onto the associated legal costs, customer claims for undelivered cargo, etc. The mitigators to prevent this type of event for many organizations still lies within their internal systems of control. Some call it know your counterparty, some call it compliance due diligence. But as everyone will know, proving due diligence is quite complex. But using outright a system such as this that is adopted by some regulators, even in conjunction with your own internal systems, would no doubt, improve chances of successfully arguing that you have done all you possibly could have done to stay on the right side of the law. And I would hope that the judge will take that into consideration when deciding the level of the fine. So that's how I would sort of summarize AIS and the compliance elements. For the vetting, the traditional methods generally rely on a periodic and independent physical inspection. It's just a snapshot in time of the operator's historic and current performance, but it is static and it doesn't really tell you much about what may happen over the horizon and out of sight. And let's face it, ships do sail over the horizon and out of sight. And that's where the monitoring comes in. So with the Windward tool enabling the continual behavioral assessment when the assets literally have sailed away, it is not just limited, loitering, suspicious voyages aside. If I was an insurer or an assurance professional, I would be able to make an assessment of a fleet to know if it is regularly taking the riskier shortcut on a voyage or arguably pushing the boundaries of safe navigation. Now, everybody's got their own different appetites to risk, but actually having that information allows organizations to make their own decisions. Put it into shore-based terms, I know by looking at the device now fitted in my car by my insurance company, which is monitoring how I drive and where I go, is having a positive effect on my own behavior when I'm driving, and also hopefully on next year's annual premium when it comes through the post. So that's on the vetting side. The commercial side, the core.
Sorry, Matt, can I jump in with a question here? Maybe?
Sure.
And again, I see I have already a few questions from the crowd here. So if anybody has more questions to Matt or Dror, either on how this happens or what the implications, feel free to write them and we'll answer them in a bit. So Matt, let me understand here for a second, okay? I'm not an assurance professional, but let me try. So would you agree that SIRE report is the main tool right now for vetting?
On the tanker side, SIRE carries a lot of weight. It carries a lot of weight. It's been around for a number of years. It's the idea is that the good guys all do inspections to a good standards and they put the report into the pot. And if I want to know about ship X, I can go and buy that report. I know that it has been completed by somebody who is competent to make an assessment of that ship, and I can look at it and on the back of that can decide whether or not I trust that vessel, that operator, to carry my molecules, which ultimately I'm still holding the risk for when they're on the water.
So could it be that, and everybody knows that the 15-year line is quite important in a vessel's life. So a lot of the majors will not charter a vessel which is older than 15 years. So could it happen and the vessel has passed the SIRE last month, but then manipulates its location? So I actually don't know what happens with it. And then it comes to pick up my cargo and I just don't know about it. Could somebody pass through an assurance test and then do it and maybe, subsequently obviously get grounded? We just saw the Express off Sri Lanka, get tragically burned, I think. So could that happen in the assurance cycle?
Absolutely. I mean, there is nothing to prevent that. It is a possibility. And that's where I'm trying to make the point of being dynamic in the assessment of the ship rather than static. You get a fuller picture of the behaviors when the vessel is at sea. I would want to know who is taking the shortcut away from a traffic separation scheme, for example. I would want to know who's got the risk appetite to take a laden Suezmax through the Magellan Straits in the middle of the winter. It will tell me things about the operator that will not be getting picked up with an inspection in port when the ship's hopefully all safely tied up.
So interesting enough, I think you're bringing up the question So people do compliance because they kind of have to, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're on a 20 vessel fleet and every vessel, let's say, is worth about 25 million bucks, that means you have assets of about $500 million. So probably investing in software to run compliance is de minimis in terms of your overall P&L. Maybe that's not how all owners think, but that's probably, financially speaking, that's probably the case. But could it make sense that just doing a bit more due diligence on how vessels are operated is natural and it's just better for business? Would you agree or not with that statement?
There will be no charterer in the world who doesn't want to have competent, well-operated vessels on their books, because where ships are not operated efficiently, that will eat ultimately into their P&L.
Yep. Okay. So do you have something to finish on the slide, or do you want me to go to the questions from the crowd?
I was going to maybe, I was going to quickly share, if my memory serves me right. So it's the instant, you mentioned it before, Ami, where you've got, 100, maybe more fixtures a day, and to complete the due diligence to get comfortable with approving or not those counterparties is a mammoth task. So that ability to instantaneously get a go, no go decision can save a lot of money. And from my memory, if my memory serves me right, and it's still quite good as my memory, that I've seen the difference here within a day of avoiding an additional $3.5 million cost, because we could take ship A and clear ship A quickly from a compliance angle, rather than ship B, because the market had moved so many points within the day. And that wasn't just the pandemic, other things happen, we see these spikes. So it's that ability to respond quickly is a real key point to the tool.
Okay, sounds good. So let me go back to questions from the crowd here. So I'll refer them to kind of both of you. Dror, we have someone here from the crowd asking, what is the equipment used to achieve this manipulation? Is this something on board the vessel itself, or is it used remotely? If bad actors can falsify a track, why do you think they do not make it look more realistic, e.g. the rapid 180 turn?
Thanks, Ami. So good question. And I have to say to the
Ami, I can't take credit. It's anonymous. it's anonymous attendee.
So anonymous attendee, great question. And to the first part of it,
maybe he wants to get ideas to to manipulate it more credibly. I'm just kidding.
So the first part really is so the technology itself, right? As I mentioned in the part that we saw the research that was being done in the past, this, in terms of hardware, this is not very difficult or expensive to do, actually. You could probably buy a generator of these and an antenna for less than $200 online. And then the question is, how is it done though, right? How are these vessel paths created? And you said, why not make it more feasible, right? Than 180-degree turn in under 2 minutes. They already did. So this is one instance that we've seen out of dozens. And as time goes along, the manipulation has become more sophisticated. We've also seen the spoofing of paths that are actually sailing patterns, not only slow speed, right? So you would see the case that Ami mentioned before, that we had a call with a company that actually said that something was strange about the path. The first time that I looked at it, it seemed almost completely natural. It really took a second, third, and even fourth look into the data itself to understand what was being spoofed exactly, and it wasn't as easy and as just highlighted as the first instance that we showed here. So in terms of the technology, it can be done on board the vessel and it can be done offshore. There are multiple ways to do this. We've seen many types of subtypologies to this, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this is nor complicated nor is it expensive at this point. It's more about how much willingness you're willing to put into this and actually go through with it.
Or in other words, I can't just look for vessels going back and forth and find the bad guys. Is that correct?
Oh no,
it's not relevant anymore. So I think maybe from my experience, and I think there's interesting comparables to the cybersecurity space, where they call this a vulnerability. So guys, if you write questions, please write them in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. just because kind of will help us answer them. So in the cyberspace, it's called vulnerabilities. So once a company like us or somebody else, there are many cyber companies, expose a vulnerability, that automatically triggers an evolution in the cases, automatically the day after. So I would not really expect this to come back as you see it right now. I would expect to see a different iteration of this as of tomorrow. Okay, good. We have another question here for the crowd. If sanctions are, this is for you, Matt, so you're gonna help me on that. If sanctions are lifted in a country such as Iran, how will due diligence look for tankers which have carried crude during sanctioned periods? Does the risk disappear, or do the historical movements still suggest they're likely to take part in AIS spoofing? And Matt, when your answer, maybe you can talk a bit about the risk appetite and the fact that some companies might have different risk appetite than others, and maybe I'll jump in at the end of your answer.
So my initial, that's a good question. My initial advice there would be you'd have to read very, very carefully what the announcements are from OFAC and OPSI in terms of ships which are X in the scenario given they're Iran. If sanctions were to be lifted, what happens to vessels that have called there in the last 3 months? Do they all suddenly become okay? So I think that would be the starting point before to check and to verify that you're not going to be breaking any rules as you do today before entering into a contract.
So maybe, thank you for that. So the gentleman who asked this question, I think first of all, our approach is let me tell you the technological approach and then the market approach. So I think our approach as a technology company, we enable our customers and users to customize their own risk. So the question is, does the risk disappear, or do the historical movements still suggest they're doing something? The answer is, you decide. We're enabling you to do this in a click of a button. And therefore, it leads me to the second answer of risk appetite. So I'll just give you 2 examples. One of our users is a bunkering operation, which really thinks they have a very low exposure because it's just fueling the vessel, and it's not the same as trading in sanctioned cargo. So just for bunkering purposes, so their risk profile they took is actually quite minimal. The look back is minimal. They're screening very specific behaviors, and it's very, very, very focused. And therefore, they can do most of the trades without almost risks, and obviously 80% less false positives. On the other hand, one of the biggest dry bulk operators in the world use our platform, and they actually ask us something we never heard from anybody else, and they ask, can we have a 30-month look back, not a 24-month look back? Because if it's even possible that somebody traded in a sanctioned area 30 months ago, we do not want to do any business with them. So I think there's no right or wrong answer. Every company takes their own risk appetite and risk decisions, and we all know about the Chevron case with Sea Hero, that basically they chartered the vessel called the Sea Hero and got quote unquote stuck with that cargo on a sanctioned vessel. So I'm getting more questions here. We have another question, Matt. Maybe this is for you. What are the main downside risks or potential costs for shipping company and financial institutions of not doing AIS screening and analysis? Perhaps legal penalties, reputational risks, losing insurance cover, and so forth. Maybe can you give us examples?
I think it would be all of those. I mean, null and voiding insurance, and having a summons from one of the regulators to come and explain yourself, a cargo that is stuck on the water, and customers who are racking up the claims against you on an hourly basis for you not having delivered what you promised that you were going to deliver. So in my experience of investing in the technology space here to comply, on the other side of that, there's a lot of opportunities because of the insights that you will get. There's also, not to be underestimated, there's the ability for the decision makers still need to be able to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. And knowing as a previous decision maker in this space that I was not alone, that if I have got this wrong, then I am not going to be the only one. And in my defense, I will be able to say that I have been doing everything that I possibly can. I've been investing to comply. Yes, there's been opportunities on the back of it, but I have done the best that I can. So to put the head in the sand now would be the wrong thing to do. But this is not going away. To the point previously around the look back periods, I remember where we used to look at what were the last 3 cargoes. That was it. Now those cargoes might have been 3 cargoes in 2 weeks. Something may come from the regulator where they'll say, well, look, it was 4 months ago. We've now arrested this vessel. There are sanctions applied against this company or against this fleet, which is another great point, is that the analysis traditionally was on the vessel, and the complicated nature of the structure of ownerships of ships would not give you, as the person looking to enter into the contract, that broader picture of, well, what is the fleet? Who is the ultimate beneficiary owner?
So thank you for that. Just a quick example. I'm sure you all have heard, or some of you heard about PB Tankers. So PB Tankers is a tanker operator from Italy, I believe, that got put in the blacklist. I think they went broke, if I remember correctly. Almost went broke in a couple of weeks because, boom, like that, all the contracts were canceled. I also recall I was in the offices of one of the, let's call it, the bigger energy majors in the world, while the Costco sanctions were announced, or a week after, and they had thousands of charter party agreements they had to cancel and rebook with somebody else. Thousands meaning more than 1,000, obviously. So the answer is, it can be reputational, it can be money, it can be your cargo stuck. But I think most of all, I would just think of this as insurance, right? We all have like house insurance or life insurance. It's kind of the same. It's the cost of doing business. By the way, it's well known in the banking sector after what's called the AML Act and the the Bank Secrecy Act and the AML Act of the late 1970s. Every bank in the world checks your transactions. If you move money between banks, you know that. So now it's on shipping. It's as easy as that. So maybe I'll go to the next question here from the crowd, because I think we're getting punchy here with questions. So I have an anonymous attendee here asking, another tracking system is the Long Range Identification and Tracking, LRIT, which is also a provision of the SOLAS Convention. Thank you, anonymous attendee. This is a very good point. LRIT is based on purely satellite technology. Do you know, or have you ever heard of manipulation of the LRIT data? Also, can you tell if both LRIT and the AIS can use together to complement each other and verify genuinity of the data? Well, it's a very good question. I'll take it myself, I think. So first of all, let me take a step back, because a lot of people, I think, don't understand the availability of LRIT data. So let me just put it to bed for a second. LRIT belongs to the ship owner. It does not belong to anybody else. The ones who can query it are the flag states, which means if I'm Liberia, I can, Matt, if I'm not, or George, if I'm not being accurate here, please jump in. So Liberia can query the Liberian ships, and was actually post 9/11 kind of technology. So it's like 20-something-year-old. So, but theoretically, it's not that everybody can, or anybody can ping any vessel. You actually need the ship owner's approval. And then you can blend AIS plus LRIT, which can complement each other and verify genuinity. They're also, by the way, right now already integrated into the Windward platform, which provide fully hybrid tracking, either real time, because you can register with us and just do it in a click of a button, or after the fact, if you did not provide us that ahead of the game. So after the fact, you can provide us LRIT and we can integrate it. So yes, we can verify genuinity. Matt or George, do you know, have you ever heard of LRIT manipulation? I haven't, for one.
Me neither.
Okay. No, not heard of it, but it's generally not continual, Ami. So unlike when we've got the IAS switched on and it's getting picked up, you can see the minute-to-minute behavior. I think by special request, you can get a ping on the SAT-C every 6 hours. Mm-hmm. Usually it's once a day, but absolutely you are right. The flag stays and the owner are the ones who have visibility of that.
Yep, and people can get access from the owner, like we get from owners to get us, or allow us, or for some of our customers, which ask the owners to allow us. But I don't think it operates at scale for all the vessels in the world. Okay, next question. So somebody asked me, is the PowerPoint stuck or only stuck in the same slide for you? The answer is it's not stuck. We just left it on the same slide because we're in the discussion phase. Next question. I hear Avi here, or one the guy from the crowd, ask, would banks benefit from your services? Is the level of due diligence required from banks, including Israeli banks, I assume you're from Israel, though the regulatory requirements are still miles behind those in the UK, for example? Should that be significant or based on best effort basis? So I'm not sure I understand the latter part of the question, but yes, we have the leading financial institutions in the world working with us. So I think the right way to think about it is we see three types of financial institutions working in consuming this type of AI. Number one is trade finance banks, which via API get within a second risk recommendation. Dol, if you can roll back to the maritime AI slide with the risk recommendation. So within a second, immediate clearance for every vessel in the world, going back according to your risk customization, plus the explainability, which is the why, which is very important, at an 80% less false positive than anything else. So that's trade finance banks. Ship finance banks use our product to review on a periodical basis, quarterly basis, their portfolio and ask what's their risk appetite to continue financing these counterparties. And correspondence banks use it in similar ways to trade finance banks. Also, banks used to bank entities, i.e. companies, not vessels. So we help them connect between their account, the account they're dealing with, to actually the vessels underneath. So they're just providing us the name of the company or the DUNS number. We're doing all the rest. Okay, I have another one. So a gentleman asks, in many of these dark transactions, there are shore-side interests, shippers, receivers, local banks, local insurers, who are intent in circumventing sanctions regimes. What kind of screening do you assist with due diligence screening of sub-charters, shippers, and or receivers to protect a major charter of vessels? It does not always lie with the activity or behavior pattern of the ship owner operator. Okay, Dol, do you want to take that?
Yes, Ami, if you could just repeat the question, I'm sorry, because
I think the document here asks, the gentleman here asks, what about everybody who's not a shipping company, right? You can look at the ship and you can look at the people who are shipping companies, but you could also look at all the rest. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the maritime side
of the ownership
side? Sorry?
So as I mentioned before, there are two aspects to this, right? We could call it the offshore and the onshore aspect, right?
Yep.
The offshore aspect is pretty straightforward. We apply artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to find indicators that are showing this type of activities, along with other behaviors that are mentioned in the advisories in the past, and trying to stay one step ahead. And the onshore is the fact that we have dynamic risk also for the commercial entities, right? Meaning that if a company, any of the 7 levels of ownership was involved in such an activity, there will be an aggregated risk for the companies that are related to such a vessel. We also have other building blocks for companies specifically, which are static, not only based on the behavior, meaning that we always look at both ends, I would say, of the operation, not only what is happening in terms of behavior. At the end of the day, a ship does what it's being told to do. So we always look and calculate also the risk that is on the commercial side and the commercial entity behind that vessel.
Sounds good. I'll also expand on that and saying, I think this is a world that's coming to the spotlight really quickly. So we're investing about $50 million directly in R&D. So obviously our core is shipping, but with several partnerships, which we'll be announcing soon, we are expanding that way beyond shipping. So the core is the ship and then the shipping companies, but then also all the rest of the UBO, which is not really shipping, it's the beneficial owner, but also beyond that to screening of counterparties which are not maritime, as well as adverse media. So I believe by the end of 2021 will be one-stop shop for all of these. Having said that, I think everybody needs to appreciate AI is complicated, technology is complicated. There's no solution works like this. And actually, I think I hear that from a lot of people, they're quite frustrated from high number of false positives. So better do this right than do this quick. Okay, we have another question. How can you, from anonymous attendee, How can you make sure you keep on top of new types of manipulations in an ongoing manner? Wouldn't the bad guys win eventually? Good question. I think, though, this was written for you.
Yes, thanks, Ami. So that is a great question. And once again, I could tell you that what we do is we always try to think also, what would we do if we were in their shoes, right? And that is also, I would say, kind of detective work in that sense. And the second thing is that we're doing this cat and mouse game, and we're in this race within a very strict set of rules, right? We know the technologies that are out there currently in terms of regulation, and as we said before, 2021 is, I would say, the new age where bad actors are trying to, I would say, play the game within that set of rules, right? So if you know AIS top to bottom, if you know LRIT, if you know Immersat, if you know all the technologies that are out there that are already implemented so deeply rooted, right, into the shipping industry, then you kind of know what is the framework in which we're talking about. So you know what are the limits, what can be manipulated, and you can also think creatively about what could be the next thing to be manipulated, right? So I think that what we need to do, and everyone that is trying to do tracking and vetting and due diligence or create a platform such as ours, is always to think, how can you stretch the boundaries of that framework and what would be the edges, right? And try to go as far as possible and try to find those indicators before the bad actors find them themselves.
So I concur. My only addition is we've seen such an uptick, about 500% in users over the last few months, that we just get exposed to much more. So the more business you see, the more you get, the more data you get from your customers, the more you get, then the more you invest in R&D, you can base on that, and you just create that momentum over and over and over again. Okay, I can take two more questions, and then we need to wrap up and move on. So Matt, this is to you. Can you clarify the comment RE percentage of vessels getting lost in the Gulf? So Matt, from a business perspective, is the assumption that all lost events are manipulations, or there are other valid reasons for the loss of visibility?
Sorry, Ami, that question was around vessels going dark, coming through Straits of Hormuz.
Absolutely. So the question is, a lot of vessels are going dark or disappearing. Are there legitimate reasons for the loss of visibility?
Absolutely, there will be at times legitimate reasons, and as you know, previously Ami and Dror have said, that's the decision, if you like, that sits with the customer for their appetite to taking on the risk. So in that event, the vessel may turn up as being amber, but under all the lenses that are applied to come up with the overall risk rating, there is one which may be it was lost, dark activity around the top of the Strait of Hormuz. That doesn't mean that you cannot do business with that. It is just highlighted in the report that a signal was lost.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to paste the link here you see on the screen on your chat. I think there are about 11 more vessels, 10 or 11 more vessels that are not in this report that you see right now. And we have not published, I think 9, though? How many vessels? 9 more. There are 9 more known vessels which we did not publish the name of deliberately. And you can't control what you don't know exists. So if you want the names and numbers, IMOs of these vessels to check on your platform, please link on the list. Please press on the link that I just pasted on the chat. And we're happy to hop on a call with you and provide you these numbers as well. So you can check in your platform if your platform sees it. So it's time for one last question here. One of the attendees here is asking, trade documents don't usually include an IMO number. How do you instantly determine if we're screening the right vessel without manual intervention? So I think the question is, what does appear? So in technology, absolutely, I agree that entity resolution is a hard problem to solve. However, there are a few ways to solve it. One way is to take the container number on the bill of lading and actually start from there. We match every container to the vessel. So you can just provide the container number or the bill of lading, and we're supposed to know in most cases which IMO that is. Otherwise, if you just have the name of a vessel, do you have other parameters that can help us zero down or own in on which vessel is that? So if it's where it had picked up the cargo, so that already gives us a geographical area to search for. So that's, again, that's an API that's quite easy to model, I believe. Or if you have a flag, or if you have any other parameters which are identifying, I think it's kind of a specific problem. So if you're going at scale, so absolutely we appreciate that different systems have different interfaces, and sometimes you need to key in and work with that. Another example is one of the biggest banks in the world works with us and just doesn't have the vessels. They just have the companies, and they expect us with the company to link back down into the vessel. So big organizations have some same problems. Data science, technology can solve them. So we can work together and figure that out. I have time for one last question. What do you think Cyprus and others will do about this activity as the flag state delisting? Matt, you got 30 seconds.
So I think at the beginning, I said, you know, the interdependencies between regulators, owners, charterers, brokers, financial organizations, insurers, they are all there. And I think that it will be on everybody's mind as they're trying to get ahead of the curve on this. I think I'm allowed to share, and I will do, Ami, that there are regulators who are customers of yours already. I won't speculate whether or not that particular flag state is a customer, but that's the way that they will combat the risk that we're all trying to combat.
Okay, sounds good. With that, we need to wrap up this webinar. If you had written a question, we did not answer you, we will come back to you over email with the questions. Again, you have a link on the chat here. Feel free to press it, leave us your name, and we're happy to follow up with the numbers of vessels that we have not exposed. I really thank the hundreds of people that have attended this webinar. I'm sure this will keep on developing. And with that, have a good weekend, and best regards from Tel Aviv and from London. Thank you, Dror. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you.